Hey, Simon.
Jim, how are you? How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. I was out of reach of internet, so I was
Ah,
like, I went dark for a few days,
okay. Just
and
in the was this planned or you just decided to go rogue off piste?
well, we went camping.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Well, glamping. It was like really nice cabin camping.
Okay.
So we were like tents in the cold snow. Um, but yeah, it was just not a very good
You went
friendly area.
camping in the snow. No, sorry. You're saying not in the snow. Right.
Not well, there was snow, but
Okay.
we were not in tents. We
Yeah,
were
yeah.
like nice,
Yeah,
warm fireplaces, cabins. Yeah.
right. Otherwise it would have been intense. But
Oh,
all
come on,
right.
son.
Yeah.
Dad jokes are nice.
I spent a lot of time this Thanksgiving thinking about measurement actually, and that is the measurement of a turkey and the doneness, because I found out that white meat and dark meat cook at different temperatures, and how do you measure it with multiple thermometers? So I was taking multiple readings throughout the day of this turkey and cooked it to perfection. So it was phenomenal. But that's not. We're not here to talk about turkeys today. What are we doing today?
So we're here to talk about this really esoteric topic.
Mm.
Um, we've maybe hinted at it once or twice. It's this thing called marketing mix modeling.
Ah,
We've
yes.
had a we've had a few
Mm.
episodes about that. But specifically, we're going to be talking about a couple of areas of marketing mix modeling that we want to focus on, which is validation and governance.
Mm.
And we're lucky to be joined by someone who's an expert on this topic. He is, I've been told, and I quote him, a flat Australian bloke who's coming to, what were the exact lines? Take over American MMM. I think was the quote. Is that right?
So something along those lines. Yeah. But emphasis on the fat Australian bloke.
Whereabouts Australia are you from?
I'm from Sydney. I'm actually in Sydney at the moment.
All right.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I'm getting married next week. So
Congratulations.
yeah. So I'm back here temporarily. But yeah, and it's and to be honest, avoiding the New York winter is
Yeah.
not a bad thing
No.
by any stretch. It's like 100, I think 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that what you guys say? Something like that. It's really nice here, basically.
Yeah. But you live in New York full time. This is where Mutinex is based.
I split my time. So Mutinex originated as an Australian business.
Okay.
We're a very large MMM vendor within the Australian market. And we've more recently come to the American market. So we've been in the American market for about 18 months now. Had some pretty good success. It's a little bit ahead of where we thought it would be. But I think the American like the volume of people that use MMM naturally in America is much, much larger than the volume of people who naturally use MMM in Australia. In Australia, you're really trying to transition off last click and all those fun techniques. Whereas in the US, you're really mostly going up against existing MMM solutions. So it's a very different market.
That is so interesting. I would have assumed it was the opposite. I would have, just because you have Aaron Bird Bass Institute there. I feel like I've read enough about people who kind of like the idea that Australia and Europe are kind of ahead of the game from a marketing effectiveness perspective, and in the United States, it feels like we're behind. Ritson talks a lot about this, about how American is kind of like falling behind.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there are two divergences to that. I don't share the same view. I think they're behind America is behind in terms of knowledge of the concepts, but Americans have tend to have a much stronger analytics practice and a much weaker theory practice. Is my experience of it. And as a result, Americans also tend to have a higher risk profile or risk tolerance of change, and tend to change and push things and run tests and things like that, as opposed to the Australian and European markets, which I work in both. I think another thing around Australia as well, it's like, let's just take a geolift test. Remarkably hard to do when you have 8 states.
Yeah. And even with 8 states, you still have like these population hubs in like 3 cities, really.
Exactly. So So, your ability to do more compartmentalized experimentation to prove out the models is much, much harder. And so that's a far more challenging problem in terms of, because if you think about the typical roadmap of someone to truly adopting MMM, it typically goes either I adopt the MMM and then I start running incrementality tests to validate and prove the MMM is one route, or I run incrementality tests and then realize, actually, I kind of want this type of view to be across all of my channels, to have incrementality across all of my channels, so I'm going to upgrade to MMM. And those two pathways, they don't really exist in the Australian market because of that limitation of the volume of geographies. And so that creates a unique market challenge. That exists across all of Southeast Asia as well. It's a very, very difficult market to take that kind of testing mindset forward. Not that I think that the American obsession with geolift is a particularly good one, because I think geolift has all sorts of problems and is mathematically unsound and introduces bias like hell into models, but that's a different topic.
Oh, okay, I kind of want to dig into that, but I know Jim has an agenda. The one thing that Jim usually waxes poetical with his discovery of it, like, oh, when Henry was 5, he once bought a lollipop, that kind of crap. Oh, not that kind of crap. I love those. I love them, Jim. One thing I did see on your LinkedIn is that you were part of a hackathon team that built a Google Glass app. What was that?
God.
What did you do with that?
Oh God, I can't even remember that. It was for the Red Cross from memory, and we were building it to try to get images from disaster sites on the ground back quickly to a central hub. So the idea is that as you're kind of going into a disaster zone, if you think about walking around a disaster zone, for me to take photos, my latency of that and managing other tasks was quite high. And so the thesis went that, well, if we can effectively make the whole thing live capture, and kind of and so people can kind of understand exactly where everything is at quickly, it would cut down the volume of people that you needed to respond in disaster recovery. It wasn't
That's
a very
awesome.
good.
No,
it wasn't.
The idea there is really interesting, and I think that there's maybe a lot of modern applications. When I think of those type of things, I go, oh, that's such an interesting. There could be modern applications where we think about creative strategy and marketing and these sort of things. When you're thinking about observability of surroundings and let's.
The better one that we did and that we won a DNA, I think it was a DNAD pencil for this, was when we were working on Alexa. And of course, Alexa, one of the pieces of research we were doing was to try to understand the percentage of households who had, and it was a very hard piece of research to do and to survey, the percentage of households who had a smart speaker in the home when a domestic violence incident occurred. Because there was an idea that we could have embed us, and we built this out to put a safe word into Alexa that would notify a friend to come over, because most people won't call the police in a domestic violence incident. However, they will text a friend to come over to try to create space and make it stop. And that was a more cool application that actually got up. And I think that was a really interesting use of, you can see kind of an intersection of 3 to 4 things and do something quite interesting with it. That was a lot of fun.
Wow, that is incredible. And just while we're talking about little fun facts about Australia, I believe Wi-Fi was invented in Australia. This is a fun fact. I heard this years ago. I'm from New Zealand originally, and so my cousin and I always go back and he's from Australia, and so we always go back and forth on random crap like that. Much like the pavlova was invented in New Zealand.
I do know a lot of the modern mapping technology, like GPS technology.
Google Maps, I believe, was piloted in Australia, in fact.
100%. Yeah, I think Google Maps was an acquisition of an Australian company.
Right, that's right.
Still have a huge amount of Google's engineering hub in Sydney is insanely big.
Yeah.
Really, really sizable. For the weight that it is. I think the Australian R&D rebate may have something to do with that, but it's a very good country for that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. But I do know we've got the topics that we want to dive into, and I think the first topic is all about the Marketers and Money Conference, which sounds exciting because I like marketing and money. What is that? What is the conference?
What does what it says on the tin, right? So,
Right.
To be honest, the genesis of the conference is my dad used to run a conference called Minds and Money. And so I
Ah,
thought, and it worked very well. And he always said, just call conferences what they do on the tin. So I thought Marketers and Money was probably pretty appropriate. It's got
yeah.
an alliteration to it. I think, most marketers. So there's a few kind of things that drive that conference. Firstly, I think that most marketers have a fairly strained relationship with the commercial functions in their
Yeah.
business, atypically, and I think often unfairly. So I think that the marketer and marketing analytics is often driving a lot of the growth in a business, both in the baseline and in the long and in the kind of short term incremental. And I don't think that that often it's very easy to talk about that commercial value and to frame that commercial value up and at the C-suite level.
Yeah.
And so, I fundamentally believe that MMM is a C-suite level tool. I think that MMM is something that every C-suite leader should be intimately familiar with. But often it's not. And so Marketers and Money is designed to start to elevate that conversation. I think as a flip side to that, I have a fundamental belief that measurement made marketing a lot smaller and less effective from 2008 to about 2020. Last click made us myopic, and last click made us focused on the wrong things, and it disconnected us from the P&Ls of companies because our metrics began to diverge from the P&Ls of companies. And so I look at last click as being like a fundamental and cardinal sin that's made marketing's role smaller in the boardroom. And so as a result, we want to try to reject that philosophy and rebuild that confidence and that ambition in the boardroom. I think thirdly, bringing together a community of marketers to talk about market mix modeling, MMM, not just at the kind of, the practitioner level, but at the senior executive level, I think is a really important thing to start to elevate the profession and discipline, and also show practitioners that they're including those on my team that it is possible for us to have an outsized influence on business growth, business trajectories. It's also just helpful for people to see like the good, the bad, and the ugly of MMM, right? Like we had a few customers up there. I mean, we had Honda, a business called Freedom, which is a huge furniture retailer, and a business called Lendy, which is probably the largest mortgage broker. And they were all talking about their like varying experiences. Honda openly said that their onboarding experience at MMM was pretty damn tough, but it
Yeah.
was still right. And so for people to kind of have those stories and see those different levels and the different ways that it can go, and to learn from that, and to learn from that in a way where you don't have a bunch of like vendors sitting there going, hey, here's how great we are, and here's all our bloody brochures and things like that, as every vendor seems to do at their conferences, and it's really lame and boring. We aim not to do that.
I love that idea because I feel like we're in a space where, MMM has kind of had this resurgence in the past 4 or 5 years, and everyone's talking about it, and everyone assumes that everyone else knows what they're doing, and they're doing these amazing, extraordinary things. And then you hear the real stories of like, oh yeah, it took us 3 months to get our Facebook data together. Or, we really struggled breaking our internal silos down, like just the real world stories that you hear from that. I was just on a call earlier today from particular open source MMM framework proprietor. There's only a few to choose from.
I was
So
going to say, I'm not going to guess because you're clearly trying to be ambiguous with who you're talking about. I'm like,
I was
there's
going to say who
three.
it rhymes with, but
Okay.
I'll stay away from that.
Okay. Yeah.
But the point being, like they were showing like a case study of one of their partners and a client use case and how they did it and this and that. And you expected to be like blown away and learn all of these great new things and tips and how they do that, and how they did that, and how this worked. And it was sad how it didn't meet that bar at all. It was just like, that's what you did. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, having a conference where you can get everyone together and like just see what's everyone struggling with, what are things that people are trying, the challenges that they're facing. Like that's huge.
I feel like you're just honing in on the fundamental problem of case studies, and I think that's always a fundamental issue of just procurement
Hey,
meetings have check boxes and they need to see it.
case studies have become so templated and
Yeah.
so lame. It's ridiculous. Like companies don't show. One of the things that frustrates me most in marketing analytics space is for a space that claims to be about objective truth. We have a remarkable ability to like polish turds.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and and actually, I would much rather like have an industry that talks authentically about the challenges that we all know exist. Like there are fundamental problems still to be solved in MMM, but we're dressing everything up with these very very polished, packaged kind of presentation layers. I don't think it's helpful for anybody to solve the fundamental problems that sit in a space. And the fundamental problems are things like we're running really complex algorithms with really small amounts of data. and and I don't care how much AI you throw into it, it doesn't matter. That does not solve that mathematical problem. And so I just think that for too long I kind of look at all the ways that companies show up, and Mutinex was originally called Mutiny. And so, we just take a quite a contrary, I suppose, a contrarian approach, because, and I suppose that's how we like to show up, and that's how we like to focus. And I mean, I think the really exciting thing for us at Marketers Money was we launched a new model called our campaign varying model, which is under patent as well. So which we're pretty proud of that work. Because I mean, you both would have worked with time varying models a whole bunch. Number one issue with time varying models is that you're effectively assuming that time to some degree infers changes and captures changes to creative and all of that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So realistically, when I'm using an MCMC algorithm with time as a component, what do I get? Model instability. So effectively, I've either got to like remove time varying or put really strong priors in. Those are my two choices. And we kind of came at it with a slightly different view and said, well, what if time's not the important thing? What if the attributes within a channel, those micro blocks of spend, are the important thing to change? So, we start to analyze what spend, CPM, publisher was, and we put that into a hierarchical structure.
I was
So
just going to ask.
yeah,
I was assuming it was hierarchical. Yeah.
yes, and so we can actually start to then assume, okay, we can actually start to see, are there different, like, was this format change the really important shift? And then you can also start to draw some inference across channels too, right? Because, 30-second bids, it's a 30-second asset, right, across channels. So you can get a lot more you can get a lot more observational strength as well across different patterns that may emerge throughout. And so we ran that and constructed that model. It benchmarked very, very well for us. And for us, that to me is the first model that has truly connected at the coefficient of, rather than doing a secondary regression to figure out like what the campaign weight or something like that, we can actually generate coefficients per campaign in the core MMM, or coefficients per format, or coefficients per publisher, or link it to different quality of ad buys or funnel stage buys. And I think that is a pretty fundamental breakthrough. It's allowed us to estimate, into the thousands of kind of learn thousands of different parameters across channels, but in a far more stable way. And so, we lose none of the stability that we used to have on our kind of time varying model with quite tight priors, but we get a lot more granularity coming out of the model, like a lot. It's a huge factor more. And I think that's really, really important, because then that allows us to talk about how do we connect to DSPs and all of that sort of stuff. And so that was a really long piece of work for us. But that seemed to get everybody excited, because when you could start to talk on stage, okay, this is how you how you isolate creative ROI, which has been the holy grail for many marketers. Like, what's the incremental uplift of launching this creative campaign? That's when it starts to get really interesting to me from a product perspective.
Right. It seems like it's potentially better aligned with the questions that a lot of marketers have and what they're trying to answer, right? Yes, there's a place to
Do you know a single marketer who plans at the channel level? I don't.
right, exactly.
But,
Yeah.
Well,
so like,
I know budgeting though that is happening at that level, and that's where this gets interesting in terms of translating that from the CFO down to the I don't want to say regular, but the hands-on keys folks, right? And this is though, I mean, one of the challenges that I've often had is the MMM gap, and that is the gap between here's your budget allocation, but it doesn't necessarily align with in-platform signals. Are you looking at in-platform signals here to sort of look in meta? I have to go up to this ROAS on this campaign, or because I think that's always the hardest part of connecting those dots.
yeah, I don't rate the in-platform signals that much.
Oh, in-platform signals are terrible. They're all you've got in real time.
I think one of the big challenges with the in-platform signals is definitionally they change under the hood quite a lot. Like that's my actual problem with them. If there was
like the degree of modeling that's happening as well is always an interesting piece of
yeah, like the platform metrics present as deterministic metrics, but a lot of the time they're modeled metrics. And so and I think that's a core limitation of how people understand the platform metrics is because they're presented deterministically, but really a lot of them are probabilistic. That's a big challenge because then the underlying kind of mechanisms can change without you knowing. So, I mean, I think to get to real time, we simply have to increase the speed of data collection. But my general mental model for that is that the general trend towards data has been to speed it up. So I don't really think as an ecosystem we need to do much in the data world other than make it easier and easier to connect and organize. But I think the provisioning of data just is naturally speeding up with the world. Like really what we're talking about to speed data up is the digitization and centralization of all records. Is that naturally happening as a structural change in the economy? Yes. So I don't really see that being something the MMM industry needs to necessarily champion. I think we need to just make a little bit of noise about it so that CIOs keep it high on their agenda. Because the natural tendency of every organization is to move towards that. And I think once that happens, we'll be able to leverage those more real-time signals in that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because the platforms often inherently are operating toward a target ROAS, and so they've got their own metrics that they're having to operate toward, and you're like, oh shit, can I bring in an external metric? Can I bring in an external target from something else? And I think that's
I mean, I think a helpful mental model I use is I think what the platforms are really building with the cappies is ETFs, right?
Yeah.
Like fundamentally, that's what they're building. They're building ETFs. Like an ETF, I can kind of go into the market, I can invest all of my money, bang, there it goes.
Yeah.
I know it's going to go up by X, but I'm going to look and feel the same as everybody else. Yeah. And I think that's what a cappy is. A cappy is an ETF. Now, as the markets around ETFs matured, you started to be able to bring more signals around them. You started to be able to inject, different options markets came around the ETFs and all of that sort of thing. Like different instruments started to emerge. And I think this, again, I generally think structural patterns are very helpful to follow. I think the media market is almost exactly patterning what happened in the stock market 30 years ago, almost exactly. So if you look
at high velocity trading shift,
look at everything that's going on, right? Like performance marketing, high frequency trading, like same thing. Like you then had the kind of the rise of hedge funds that both were able to quant long and short. Sounds like a lot like MMMs to me. Then you had kind of the rise of ETFs as well. Sounds a lot like the cappies. You had the brokers starting to take commissions from a whole bunch of people on the side to sell and push their stock as investment banks. Sounds pretty much like the media agencies today. Like you can basically take every component of what is happening in the measurement ecosystem and fundamentally link it to a parallel pattern 20 years ago in the stock market. And so if you accept that view and if you understand that view, then you can pretty much start to pattern what mechanisms that you need to build to start to enable that future.
Not to extrapolate too far, does that mean we're on course for a marketing or a media crisis in terms of how this is all going to shake out? Do we have
I certainly think that, if you look at the volume of the divorce, like the current agent principal media kind of, trend, the push towards trading that, the number one thing that is going to have to be regulated is the role of a media agency presenting themselves as an agent and also acting as a sales representative for companies, because you cannot be in the game of measurement and also be selling media inventory. There is no financial market in the world where that is legal.
It's an interesting. Yeah, sorry.
And and so there is no financial market in the world where that is legal. And so the fact that around, I'd say around 30 to 40% of the market is agencies selling measurement services. I think that 30 to 40% of the market is likely going to be regulated. And I think the way that will happen is there'll be a whole bunch of companies that spend a whole heap of money on media, being promised certain growth outcomes and targets, and it will blow up in their face. Their investors will be asking what happened. There'll be an investigation into the quality of media inventory. And then there'll be a decision that actually we need to divorce these things and separate these things because it's a material risk to companies. And, and that's where I think there's a strong argument to say that if you are a publicly listed company, you should not be able to buy measurement services from your agency because you're in breach of SOX compliance. But there hasn't been an enforcement case in that area, so no one's thought it through. But if you look at the regulation, it is explicit. You cannot report on internal financial controls, e.g., measuring the ROI and value of inventory that you're investing in, and also be trading or operating within those internal controls. So SOX compliance already rules out agencies from selling measurement services. No one's talked about it, but it 100% is clear-cut in the regulation. And so from that basis, you kind of look at that and you go, well, okay, in the measurement landscape, 40% of marketers in the enterprise sector probably have to find a new measurement vendor before something bad happens around SOX compliance. And if they don't, they're probably going to be in deep shit.
Jim, wasn't there a thread on the MMA Hub a while back? I want to say there was a big conversation on this.
There was, and I think we were actually going to talk about it on. So I think that was going to be part of an upcoming episode.
All right. Okay. Stay tuned, folks.
But before we go down the legal rabbit hole, I did want to circle us back around to we routed up and talked about the campaign varying methodology, and that kind of led us down the path of measurement. I want to bring us back to the other announcement you made at the conference, and touch on this a little bit. The integration of WARC's body of knowledge. And I have to pause and say WARC is WARC. It's the World Advertising Research Center. I think, a lot of our listeners in Europe and Australia probably are familiar with WARC. I feel like United States, I have to oh, have you heard of WARC? And they're like, the blank stare tells me that they haven't. So
I genuinely think that Jim hates or thinks so poorly of the American measurement community. And I'm like, dude, I think there are so many brilliant people on the here.
Marketing know it pretty well, but yeah.
Maybe I'm just down on.
I meet brilliant people every day in this industry here in America. It's very, very cool. And a lot of them know it. But anyway,
so, of course, all of our listeners have heard of WARC, because, they're smart, amazing, beautiful people that have heard of WARC. But anyway, the point was the announcement was that you're integrating WARC's body of knowledge into MAITE. Is it MAITE or MAITE?
MAITE.
Yeah. Okay. Because
what can you do with MAITE?
Well, because it's Mutinex, which used to be called Mutiny. So
but MAITE is just it's Antipodean friendship slang.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. Gosh, I'm getting us so far off field here. So integration of WARC's body of knowledge into MAITE, which is your AI growth consultant. Correct me if I mischaracterize it, but basically, grossly mischaracterize it as ChatGPT for marketers, right? It has knowledge now from WARC's body of knowledge, but also looking at your own modeling results and being able to kind of marry the two. The thing that I love about this idea is that you're not just taking the quantitative approach, right? Oh, we have modeling, we have stats, we have machine learning, we can model your data and give you a numerical answer, but also now we have theoretical knowledge, we have kind of qualitative knowledge about generally how the top of the industry thinks and knows that marketing works. We can kind of combine those two into a tool that gets people a faster answer to the question that they have. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Like, where did that come from? What was the idea that started that?
Well, so we've had MAITE for about a year and a bit. I think it's quite fundamental to how we think. I think a lot of this depends on what you see the role of MMM as being, right? So I think a lot of practitioners in the market would describe MMM as being about causal inference and all of that sort of stuff. I would argue that's a practitioner view. I don't think that's a product use case view. So I think the role of why do I, and the reason I kind of say that, and the analogy I always give to my team is, does anybody wake up in the morning and go, do you know what I want to buy today? Some causal inference. Answer, no. Like no one wakes up. So that tells me that that's a tool, right? And that's a tool to get to the actual product outcome. And so one of the things is ideologically that I think the MMM industry is really, really not great at is I think we speak too much in terms of tools we want to use rather than products people love. And what I mean by that is that the job of an MMM platform long term is to not just build, it's to build a product that makes people fall in love with finding the truth, you know. And that's actually a really hard thing to do because a lot of marketing has built in kind of beliefs and biases and things like that. Your platform's job is to make people fall in love with finding the truth. And if we can do that, you know, you start to democratize truth seeking the way data scientists think about it to the entire marketing organization. And I think that's a really, really important ideological position to think through. Off the back of that, I then go to why MAITE? And to my job, one of the hardest things about market mix modeling is the retrieval of an answer from the model. And the retrieval of an answer generally has to be overlaid with three things. One, I've got to extract all of the data, and that data is typically from multiple points. Like I'm not just looking at the ad stock in isolation, for example. The second is I've then got to translate that data into an answer. The third is I've then got to overlay external context to try to contextualize that answer. Typically, that used to take us 3 to 4 weeks to do that really, really well. Mm-hmm. My challenge to our product team is do that in 90 seconds. And so to my mind, that's when we start to take the marginal cost of operating, the internal cost of ownership around analytics dramatically down. And so I then kind of extrapolated that out to, you know, how do we talk about, you know, we often ask ourselves another question, which is, why are organizations not data-driven? And if you think about it, because most organizations don't drive their decision-making through data, they'll drive a minority percentage of decisions. And so why are most organizations not data-driven? Well, if you talk to customers, it's because it actually takes quite a long time to get an answer, and time is money. Yeah. And so the more we can reduce that cost of getting the answer, the better off we will be in terms of making a higher percentage of the decisions data-driven. So for my business, again, when I come back and go, we want the world to fall in love with finding the truth. We want the world to be driven by data for answers. I don't think the question is, do I have a good model? I think that's kind of table stakes. I think the question is does your operational infrastructure drive the cost of getting an answer to a very, very low marginal cost per answer? And I think that's a much, much better way and a more instructive way to think about the problem set. So I'm not going to dress that up with hey, here's fancy LLMs and AI, because I just don't think that that's a very principled way to think about AI. I think too many people go, oh, AI this, AI that, and really don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Whereas, you know, in my mind, I think the principle that we're trying to operate to is when we're looking at how people interact with our user experience or interact with, you know, the various deals that we're striking or the various kind of things that we're doing, we're looking at it through a lens of how do we compress it and reduce the cost to operate within this area. And I think that for large enterprises in particular, that's very, very important. And so that's when we look at WARC, the extension of that was pretty logical. We kind of went, what's the largest source of kind of global effectiveness context that we can kind of pull? And the Lions and WARC were the obvious partner for that. And so we knew them quite well. We had a great conversation. We were originally introduced by the Tracksuit founders, who were great and dear friends. And we negotiated this over some period of time. It took about 6 months to get the whole thing up and running. But they've been great partners, and they had to their credit, they built the API to kind of fuel it and things like that. They've been an absolutely fantastic group to work with, and they're very interested in seeing the world of effectiveness placed next to the world of marketing effectiveness analytics. And so bringing those two things together in one singular experience, I think it was a hard thing to do, but I think it's the best thing to do in terms of compressing that cost to get an answer.
So I guess give me an example of a common question you could ask, mate, to that maybe CFO would ask.
Why don't I just pull up the last 10 that have been asked?
Let's do that.
I'll just read them out, because the thing is getting a lot.
There wasn't someone crazy in there asking just random questions like,
look,
why is Henry going spearfishing? Those kind of things.
I have seen that one as a joke before. So
there was that Google Analytics spam a long time ago where folks were using the measurement protocol to inject hits into Google Analytics. So it was like, vote for Trump. So I was like, who are they targeting with this? This is like one person that will see this. Anyway, what are these prompts?
Here's a couple. So if what does creative performance look like for TV? Share a bulleted list of 5 suggestions for our media agency, focusing on what they should do. Can you build me a line graph of total sales over the last 3 years?
So that's not even an in-depth question. That's literally just like a text to SQL question, or a text to
yes, some of it would be. Can you look at ad format performance on CTV year on year? How do specific factors like seasonality or economic indicators impact performance? Can you show me any notable changes to our external environment and how that may have influenced our media environment? I'm creating a compelling board. Now, there's a lot of board reports in here, to be honest.
This is the play. This is the most important part of this, right? Is being able to report to the folks who are ultimately
correct. How can we kind of adjust our flighting to maximize ROI for the next 12 months?
Okay, now that one's an interesting one. The question that I would have here, and the most common question that I hear from clients and brands out there is, where do I spend my next best dollar? And I didn't hear that question there, but I'm like, that's the only question that really seems to matter.
There's a few like that, but I would just say it's actually so intuitive the second you log into the platform that it's pretty obvious. We have things like power plays, which are automating the discovery of like where to scale up spend quickly. So it automatically designs a scale up experiment for you and things like that, and then tells you where to run it, where to test it, how to match market test it, all that sort of stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah. So all of that stuff's like pretty well automated within the platform. Like, you don't really have to think about experimentation in the platform, because that's all being designed for you.
So how are you validating the outputs that are coming here? Because this is like, I've used a number of I'll call them constrained LLMs within different platforms, not just MMM, but like in commerce platforms and so forth. And oftentimes, one, they've got a prompt. They struggle with the data retrieval, because I may be looking at a custom table with a filter on it that I'm just like, no, this has nothing to do with my question. And then two, I appreciate how LLMs can train, but like the hallucinatory properties of a transformer oftentimes lead to maybe the extrapolation of findings and things that just aren't there.
So I think a few things. Firstly, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
We can just put that up straight
away.
But
humans aren't either. So I think there's a fallibility aspect to both. It's more confidence of the line. Yeah.
So I would say that we do have an error rate. We track it. We do kind of put a pretty clear disclaimer on that. I think the tendency of all AI products to say is our AI product is perfect. Ours is not.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's no such thing right now.
Yeah. So I don't think that's a helpful framing. But I say this to my team that I estimate the hallucination rate of humans to be 20%. So, the current LLM benchmarked, because hallucinations is really a fancy word for make shit up, right? Like that's really what we're talking about. Humans make shit up all the time. So, like, humans even make statistics up all the time.
When I was
one in three humans make statistics up. Like,
the quote from Abraham Lincoln. Right, everything on the internet is true. Abraham Lincoln. No, my father, when I was a kid, often would say to me, "The best thing about public speaking, Simon, is that you can make shit up." And I was like, "That's not true. You can't do that. That's absurd." And in the era of the internet, I'm like, "No, you can't do that. I'll get fact checked." But you're right. People, maybe it's not full making things up, but it is finding a narrative for the lines of the patent that they were trying to sell anyway, and it's the exclusion of data as a result when you're telling the story.
Yeah, so when you're talking LLMs, I think there's like a few things that you can do, and I don't want to give away too much of our technical architecture here, so I'm going to be slightly guarded and annoying in my answer, and you guys will just have to tolerate that. But I think one, you can constrain the LLMs towards using to make them avoid using their own judgment or use like making stuff up quite explicitly. Yeah, by forcing the use of tooling. Yeah. So that's a really effective way. Now, your downside cost and limitation to that is that you tend to have a problem from there in terms of, as you constrain something, its scope to answer things becomes lesser and lesser. So, and your reliance on building technical infrastructure and maintaining technical infrastructure becomes larger and larger. So effectively, that's the trade-off problem that sits under the hood. You start to lose a lot of the benefits of quote unquote automation that comes from the LLM. So it's definitely not as simple as deploy LLM and hope for the best. There's a pretty rigorous process that goes through it. I do think agentic software architecture is going to be an emerging skill, like the ability to architect how the agentic systems retrieve information is probably the number one skill set that I think will be involved in building deep LLM applications. And so, solution like I don't think I've heard people talk about solution architecture much with regards to large language models. It's probably the number one thing that we do talk about. We don't talk about prompt engineering. We talk about solution architecture as it relates to the large language models. So I think that's how we've solved the problem. In terms of the validation protocols, we have obviously user-generated protocols. We're also trying to detect things ourselves by doing spot checks and samples, but it's imperfect.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it that it's imperfect, and we're just constantly trying to take those metrics down. And I think as with any kind of validation, what you try to do is create a clear and transparent benchmark. And then you can start to actually at least communicate how you are doing validation very, very clearly and very, very openly. And I think that's really how governance typically works in my mind is if you are benchmarking, validating, and you're able to communicate that clearly and openly, then you're generally in a good place. It's when you're kind of doing benchmarking or governance in the dark, I think you're in a really shit place.
Yeah, no, it's interesting just as I think about the realities, because the idea of having an LLM on top of an MMM is always to me being sort of the Turing test of measurement. Is this idea of how far can you take this to be your measurement aid, the ability to have this full confidence. And one of the pieces that I'm wondering about though as you're going through this is the inherent nature, because I often refer to MMM as the most opinionated form of measurement, even though it is very scientifically rigorous. This idea of but there's so much context that's held in all these emails and conversations. How do you think about the inclusion of that kind of information? I guess we'll call it you talk about external context. What about the internal context to the organization?
Can you give me a worked example?
Yeah. So we'll often have sometimes a CMO will have they will have got the CMO role, and this is more in the modern era now. They will have got the CMO role. On the way, they will have also been a social ads manager. And so they'll have this sort of informed opinion as to how social advertising works. And they will therefore have opinions on what they think is happening within a system, how they think we should be spending budgets on platforms. and there is a degree of needing to balance opinion with fact or with outputs in order to convince them that this is the right decision. So it's sort of understanding what are their if you just outright say you should spend $50,000 more on these 3 campaigns within Meta, they may have an outright rejection to be like, no, Meta's not going to perform like that. And you're like, what's that based on? You're like, my opinion. And that's not a great position, but that is a reality of what a lot of MMM readouts lead to, is the opinionated feedback loop. And so the question here is ultimately, how do you maybe think about the inclusion of that as a way of handling challenges?
I think, again, I'm not really sure that's an LLM problem. I think
No,
what we're
it's not
really,
it's an LLM opportunity.
what I really think, I don't even think it's related to LLMs.
Well, to integrate the data is more what I'm thinking of here. Like if to bring that context in.
So realistically, I think there are 2 components to that question. Like it's where do you want that opinion to be injected? I think too many modelers inject that opinion at the price into a model. I think that is a really bad thing.
Right.
And so that's one of the
reasons all the way
that,
down.
Yeah, because like, if I'm basing stuff off an opinion or assumption, that's fine. But let's make sure that it's an explicit assumption rather than encoded bias, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really critically important topic in this space. And so, too often someone once asked me, do you guys like to take prize from clients? And I'm like, well, generally I'd say no. What we'd like to try to do is increase the observational power of the MMM through geo models and stuff like that. Because I think the challenge on the other side is is your MMM just a reflection of what the business wants to believe, or is your MMM a reflection of what's going to happen in the future? By the by, I think that it's better to solve that by having things like a good budget optimizer where you can put constraints in, and you can start to also comment up why you've put those constraints in, and layer in an assumption over the top saying, well, we think creative's going to work X% harder, and so therefore, we're going to put that assumption into the budget optimizer. I think the interactivity and the utility of budget optimization tools is a really important component to solving that problem. But to do that, you have to, again, go back to what I was saying before. Think of it as a product, not as hey, we want to run the model to do a budget optimization. There's a whole bunch of features you need around that budget optimizer to actually make that work effectively, like the ability to layer in assumptions, like the ability to comment, like the ability to track that scenario over time.
Right.
Like all of those things matter a lot, right? And so I think what we're really talking about is the fact that most MMM products have stopped at run the model to generate budget optimizations or run the inputs to generate the budget, to generate the likely outcome. And that's where we stopped at a product level, because that's where we as practitioners all think that, that's the right place to stop. The product person in me would say the reason why it's very hard to operate an MMM product is because it lacks all of the functionality to capture the user needs of doing all of those organizational choices that you're talking about.
Right.
And so really we're confusing like a modeling and data problem with a product and UI problem, which I think is a really common pattern in the MMM sector. Is we kind of go, because there's lots of data scientists in the sector, our instincts are every problem should be solved with a modeling tool.
Right.
And realistically, most organizational problems and interactions can be solved through better UI and interactivity and solving the user problems that way, rather than trying to, tweak the models to please everybody.
Yeah, I think moving into the next topic, and this kind of segues nicely, is, like for that CMO who used to be a social ads person who just doesn't believe the output of the model. Like one of the ways that we can combat that is by having proper validation of the model, right? We can show that it actually is performing well and that it's capturing the underlying reality of the cause and effect of what's going on. A lot of different ways that we can show, like when validate models, we can do robustness tests. We could look at out of sample, in sample metrics, a lot of different ways. And to that point, earlier this year in the summer, your team launched the open MMM validation framework. So talk a little bit about the purpose of that, what you're trying to get out there, how you hope people use it. What's the main thing you're trying to get across with that?
Well, so first of all, I want to hat tip the Recast team here,
We love recasts on the pod. They're big fans.
who have absolutely led the way on validation.
Yep.
And who have absolutely driven the conversation on this. And I think we're way ahead of everybody, including us, on this. So I think it's really important before we get into any conversation about validation of models to say that Recast have been the business that have pioneered and championed this. And we are standing very much in their wake on this, I would describe it, rather than, being the leaders ourselves. So I think that's a very important aspect to this conversation. I think what Tom Vladek and Michael Kaminsky have done in this space is just phenomenal. To my mind, I thought about this in 3 ways. First of all, the number of RFPs that I've been in where validation is not a topic is high. And I think if I can present the fanciest methodology deck, I can promise you that, which will look very, very good and very, very compelling. But it doesn't mean my methodology is better. And I think with the proliferation of lots of AI claims and things like that, I think it's important to give procurement departments a way to understand validation and understand how to run validation and how to benchmark validation. I think the second thing that we felt was that governance that's not transparent is probably not good governance. And to some degree, we want people to challenge us on our governance. By being transparent on our governance, we're going to be doing some updates based on some feedback to the Open MMM eval, but we believe in being transparent on governance. We also believe in model choice. So, so I think that we should be running Meridian and PyMC alongside our models. And I think that's a fundamentally important thing to do. And so I think that comparison is a very, very healthy thing to do. And it's a forcing function for our business, right? As I say to people in my business, let's win on our model quality. Let's not win on our ability to sell the models, methodology and fancy decks. And I think that's very, very important. And so to some degree, by being open on the validation methodology, it forces us to be very, very good in those areas, which has a flow-on effect of forcing our internal incentives to behave that way. I'm going to say a third thing, which I think is quite controversial, is that I think Meridian is being dressed up as a far more sophisticated model than it is. And so Meridian only estimates 1 channel ROI over 2 years. I don't know any marketer who would believe that. If I said to any marketer, your channel ROI is the same for the last 2 years, and it's never changed, despite you changing your creative 8 times and changing your format mix and your audience mix 10 times, I think they'd all look at me and go, that's wrong. But I don't think anyone has quite obviously exposed the limitations of that methodology, and I think there is a limitation to that methodology. I think Meridian's been awesome at lifting the standards and lifting the discussion and the elevation of geo-based models, the elevation of the reach and frequency data and its importance to starting to calibrate curves. I wish more publishers would supply that, by the way. And I think it's been really important to the Bayesian conversation. But I think it's a starting point for most people to enter the MMM discussion. And I think in a lot of enterprises right now, because the agencies have picked it up and are using it to try to sell the Google Advanced Technical Model, I think it's being repackaged from where Google intended it to be, which is a start point for many. And it's being repackaged to many, not through Google, but through the kind of wider agency sector as a highly sophisticated offering when it's not. And so I think having those benchmarks is quite critically important to starting to understand some of the challenges of the models and having those comparison points.
But for anyone listening, by the way, there's an episode that Jim and I did all about Meridian. Last year was it? I think, Jim. Well, we talk about this, and we talk about Robin, and we talk about PyMC, and the degree of sophistication that these tools have. And to your point, though, it gets the conversation going because it does bring a lot of this to the C-suite. It brings a lot of awareness and just interest in the
I,
topic.
I,
But
I,
yeah,
I often joke with Google's team that they've become my marketing budget. So
Yeah.
so I'm very grateful.
Google took MMM mainstream. I think Meta really started the push with Robin, but I think that Google really completed it to the full. Everyone knows about it.
And the Google market mix modeling teams are quite good to work with.
Yeah,
From a data acquisition perspective, they like to do really cool stuff in R&D. Like we have a great relationship with the Google MMM rep in Australia. They've been really, really good. Like so I think there's a lot to say about working with them to try to get, you know, novel data sets and things like that. And they've been really, really helpful in that context. I think the way that Meridian is being repackaged by many is not necessarily a good thing.
Oh man, dude, I genuinely wish that we could go on for like another hour at this point because there's so many more questions I've got for you, and just it has been so enjoyable. And maybe who knows? Maybe there's a future gym where we could have possibly we could have Henry back on. Maybe we could have someone from House or Measure to talk about the geo-based incrementality project.
I would love.
Okay. All right. Well, I love that. I love that because it is a hot topic and it's one that I think it's very in vogue right now, but it's also one that is not necessarily contested. So I'm very interested in what your POV is going to be there. So maybe we'll have that discussion another time. But for the those who are listening, you know, if you're sitting out there and you're reckoning with the complexities of modern MMM and you're trying to sell your leadership on causal inference as an outcome rather than a tool, well, maybe it's time to measure up.